Hi, everybody. Welcome to episode 1 of the 505 podcast. I'm here with Pete Alarie, who probably needs no introduction to a lot of people, but Pete is just getting back into the class after a bit of a hiatus, and he's going to be sailing this year with Mike Zani out of the reinvigorated Newport fleet, and we're psyched to have him back. Pete and I have known each other for a long time. He was one of the first people that I ever sailed the 5.0 with, and certainly taught me a lot going along, some of which I've managed to retain and can use, much of which is lost to the sands of time. So Pete, thanks for joining.
Well, for having me, Dave. I'm excited to be back sailing the boats. It's been a few years break for me, and excited to be talking to you here.
Yeah, cool. So let's start in the Wayback Machine. How and when did you first get into 5.0 sailing?
I have to credit Zach Leonard and by extension Dave Dyson with that. Zach was a sophomore, or we were both at Yale, and Zach was a sophomore. And Dave Dyson, who was a great 505 sailor from the 70s and 80s and through the 90s and 2000s. He came by Yik Yik looking for a skipper. He was, I don't know if one of the first, but certainly one of the early crew owners, which was a thing when I started sailing the boats. A lot of the crews owned their own boats, and they would just plug in skippers in the back. So Dave was one of those. He had he was actually the original owner and builder of Dump Truck 7318. So he came by Yik Yik one day, the Yale Corinthian Yacht Club, and was just looking for someone to do a 505 regatta that weekend. And Zach just happened to be there and ended up going to the event and came back on Monday just wild-eyed. Was just like, you are not going to believe these boats. Like, they are the absolute best. And just, of course, was instantly good at it. He's such a good sailor, both Zach and Dave. And, they had a great time, and Zach was just hooked at that point. And later that same year, or possibly the next year, I can't remember the exact timing, but I think it was pretty quick after that first sail. Zach was so excited that Dave was like, well, I've been thinking about getting a new water rat. How about I sell you the boat didn't have a name at the time, but how about I sell you 7318 and I'll get myself a new water rat. So Dave bought the Bassmaster, which was 8083, I think, and Zach was the second owner of what we came to refer to as Dump Truck, the yellow hull wood deck Lindsay. So Zach, as a sophomore in college, had a 505 at Yik Yik, and that was that. Like, my freshman year, or might have been my sophomore year, but we started sailing. No, it was my freshman year, 1985. Started sailing the 505 out of Yik Yik. So it was pretty hard to get back into 420 after the days in the 505. But we sailed that boat a lot together that first year, and raced that summer and the next, and so on. Actually, my timeline, now that I'm talking about it, my timeline's a little messed up. Zach sailed with Dave, and then later that summer, we got to babysit a nice water rat that Joe Thompson owned. He basically had no place to keep it, and just said, all right, you guys can sail my boat as much as you like, as long as you'll store it for free and take care of it. So my freshman year had use of Joe's boat, and then my sophomore year, Jack's junior year, he bought Dave Dyson's dump truck. So we basically sailed a whole competitive season in a borrowed boat. And then Zach bought the dump truck the next year. So it was in college when I started.
Right on. And had you done any trap crewing at that point, or was this like, were you straight out of junior and college sailing and into that?
I had done a little bit of 420 crewing as a junior sailor, and then did a little bit of FD racing before I sailed the 505. So I actually did a couple events in the 505 just because I was never really tall enough, but I was sort of big enough. I sailed with a kid from Navy named George Slook, who asked me to, like, my freshman summer, or before I even went to college, I hooked up with him somehow. And so no, I hadn't done a lot of trapeze crewing, just kind of learned in that boat. So,
It's a pretty good thing about being 20 years old, huh?
Yeah. Just I can learn that.
Plenty of time, you heal quick. It's all good. So I don't know that I've ever heard the story of how the dump truck came to be known as the dump truck. What's up with that?
I'm not sure there was any one specific moment, but at the time when Zach and I started sailing together, or started sailing that boat together, we were listening to a lot of Jonathan Richman and the Modern Lovers, who has probably his best known song is Pablo Picasso from the Repo Man soundtrack. But he has this goofy little song which goes something like, dump truck, spare my car. Don't you know how fine it are?
Okay.
So I don't know how that song became, we just love that little riff. It's about a 1.5-minute long song, maybe even shorter. It might just be more of like a short poem that he sings on this album. And the name, that's where I always associate the name coming from, was that Jonathan Richman song.
Right on.
I don't even know the name of the song, but that's one of the lines in the song.
And then if I know the history, Zach sold that boat to Nick Trotman, right? And then you were a man without a boat, and the next I know, you were sailing with Macy a lot, right?
Yeah, that's right.
In the meantime, you'd done an FD campaign.
Yeah, yep. Well, I sailed FDs with Mike Loeb for the 1988 Olympic trials.
Okay.
I ended up taking a semester out of school, and we did some sailing in Europe and a lot of racing in the U.S. Had some good coaching. Jonathan McKee was our primary coach for that FD group. He, off his recent gold medal in '84, was a pretty good resource. But just got a lot of days on the wire sailing FDs, and then started sailing with Macy as well, sort of at the same time.
And how did you guys hook up?
I think I just knew Macy from racing with Zach. We did a bunch of midwinters and East Coast championships, and I don't think I ever sailed in North Americans with Zach. That could be wrong. I'm not sure, but really just from the regattas, being around Macy, probably the East Coast and midwinters.
Right on.
And he called me after Zach sold the dump truck, and then we started sailing in, that would have been like the early 90s, 91 or something like that.
Yeah, the only North Americans I've done to date was the one in Detroit, which had the greatest regatta T-shirt of all time, and you guys won that, and that was, as I recall, it was kind of a squeaker with you and Howie and Steve, right?
It was. So Macy and I won 2 North Americans. I'm not sure if they were back to back or if there was a year or 2 in between, but both North Americans that we won, that one in Detroit and then one in Hyannis, came down to a last race scenario where it wasn't just like who beat who. We needed help in both scenarios. And in Detroit, by memory, the points, I think we started the final race in 4th place. Relatively close in points, but we needed basically we needed to win the race and have Mike Punnett and Scott E. Clay be third, and then Mike and Howie had to be fourth, and there might have even been another boat, Jeff Boyd perhaps, that had to, you know, sail his drop. I mean, it was just like one of these where you're like, you know, I would love to say we could win this, but no shot.
Right.
But we ended up leading around the top mark, and Mike Peralt was in second in the race. And, you know, I was like, wow, this is kind of working. You know, the other boats it was kind of a weird, if memory serves, it was kind of a light and wacky beat. And we, you know, hit the correct corner on the first light air shift. So we got around the top mark in good shape, and then had enough distance to the other contenders where they were back in the fleet, you know, in the 10 range. We're like, all right, well,
back with us.
Pretty sure Peralt can hang on to the 2-hole here. You know, we'll hold on to the 1 and just hope that, you know, Howie doesn't pass Punnett, or, you know, it was just one of these things. It was, you know, we finished the race and then had to sit there and write it all down and add it up again. And, you know, I don't know what the final scores were, but in the end we did win. And then the one that we won in Hyannis was a similar thing with Jeff Boyd, where we had to win and he had to be fourth, I think. So we needed two places on him. And somehow that worked out too. Similar thing, like kind of I think there was decent breeze to start, and then towards the end of that race, it got pretty light, and we ended up, Macy was getting very nervous by memory, and I ended up, I think, steering across the finish line on the downwind run with Macy sitting to leeward. And, you know, Macy kept like looking around really nervously, and I'm like, Macy, just sit still. We can't really change what's going to happen. Let's just be cool, y'all. And we, you know, kept the boat kind of ghosting along and got through the finish and won that one too.
Nice. And then we fast forward a couple of years, and you're back in the dump truck with Zani making a go at the 98 Worlds. How did that all come together?
I don't remember the actual origins. I think Mike and I were probably team racing a bit together at the time, Vanguard 15 team racing. We sailed on a couple different, you know, teams together. One of them was Zach and Zani, Zach Leonard and Mike Zani and myself were the 3 skippers. And, you know, either Zani or Zach would bow out or in with various other thirds. So we're doing a bunch of team racing, and I think just got the idea to, Nick was buying a new Rondar for that Worlds, and just decided to, you know, buy that boat back off him, do a bunch of work on it, and put that together for that campaign.
Yeah. So by that point, the dump truck was getting a little long in the tooth. It's what we, you know, have always referred to as a super boat in the class, made out of Kevlar and cord, and probably still as solid as the day it was built. But you know, what was a little bit of the process of getting that boat to where you felt good about, you know, taking it into battle that year?
Well, like you say, I always, you know, having sailed I don't know what the number is, probably more than 30 different 505s over the years. You know, they all sort of have a little bit of a different deal. And that boat was always one that you were like, yeah, this boat's quick. It's just the balance point, you know, the centerboard and the rudder and the mast depth and the rake and everything was just set up, and it was always fairly easy to make that boat go fast. So we had confidence in the platform. You know, the boat had never been really neglected. And I think I've always thought in my mind that one of the things that made that boat special was that it was, you know, its first owner, Dave, that's working at Mark Lindsay's shop at the time. So he built the dump truck as his own personal boat. in the heyday of Mark Lindsay's boat building. So Larry Tuttle was working there at the time, and Nick Gray, who both became, kind of the gurus of blade design. So Dave, kind of built that boat, with the help of the other guys. Neil Fowler was working at that shop at the time. So, that was his like pet project. And having built boats and done projects, and, anyone that's done stuff for themselves versus stuff for other people, and it's for yourself, you like to think you take that little bit of extra effort with each little part of the process. And I really feel like that was the case with that boat, that, every little extra corner of cloth was trimmed off, every little edge of laminate was pushed down, extra well. And the veneers on the tank were specially picked. And, it was just, I think a really lovingly built boat that was always fast. So when Mike and I bought the boat, it, I think was slightly overweight, not radically. And we just decided to try to put it on a weight loss program. So we stripped all the hardware, did some re-rigging and saved a bunch of weight in hardware. And ended up, those early Lindsay Kevlar gel coat boats had some finish problems on the hulls. Excuse me. So there were some areas on the hull that needed refinishing. So we ended up stripping all the original yellow gel coat off, and originally it was gray and then later white on the bottom. So, didn't really have to do much in the way of structural work on that boat, but it was, finishing and sort of weight loss to get it up to speed.
Yep. And that world, that year went pretty well for you guys. And one of the funny things about that whole era was that it had been, I don't know how many years, a while since an American team had won the Worlds. A bunch of guys had come close, but in the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s, actually a bunch of Yale guys were doing really, and jumbos were doing really well at Worlds, taking it, between the two teams every back and forth. And then we get to Hyannis in 98, and like people were ready, so what do you think happened in that little run up to that, to where all of a sudden the US could pack a bunch of boats into the top 10 and take the top spot with Nick and Mike?
I think just kind of a rededication to the style of sailing for the group. I wasn't around when, by memory, I think it was a 4-year run of American victories starting in 78 or 79 with Steve Benjamin and Tucker Edmondson, I believe. And then Ethan Bixby won with Cam, and then Gary Knapp won with Cam, and then
Steve Taylor
won with
Penfield.
Was he sent with Dave Penfield?
So. Yeah.
So the order is probably wrong on those, but basically 4 years in a row, those teams, all kind of from Northeast U.S., were all, I assume, sailing together and working at it and did well. And then for that Hyannis World, we did a lot of sailing with Nick and Mike. Starting the year before. Kind of group training, kind of open book mentality of trying to get better. We knew Howard Hamlin and Mike Martin were, kind of the class of the class from the U.S., having been pretty steady competitors at the World. They were the U.S. benchmark, and Howard had been second a bunch of times and third a bunch of times. And, if you look back at his record over the years, like he had always been, at the front of the world's fleet pretty consistently. So, we didn't do much training with Howard, but he was certainly a good benchmark at North Americans or the bigger events to check in with and be like, hey, I've sailed against that guy, and he's excellent, but he's not unbeatable. So if that's the top of the world's fleet, then we could probably get there or close.
Right.
And, just kind of dug it in. And then Nick and Mike just had a great event. It was a little bit of a mixed bag regatta. And, they had some consistent results and, came on really strong at the end.
Right on. So you talked a lot about Howie just then, and soon after that World, you and Howie teamed up for a few years. How did that come together, and what was that like, sailing with the legend?
Oh, it was what a great what a great person to sail with, and just what a great person. I have so much respect and love for Howard. He's just such a great dude. You don't really find too many people that are down on Howard Hamlin. The guy's just absolute all-star in every way. But he and Mike, after the Hyannis World in '98, went to France. I didn't go to that event, but I don't know where in France it was. But they won that World in '99, and then the next Worlds were going to be in 2000 in Durban, South Africa. And Mike Martin, after winning the Worlds as a crew, came up with the totally ridiculous and audacious idea that, he could switch and not just be a crew, but he wanted to win a World as a skipper too, which, so he decided to switch to the back of the boat, and told Howard that, obviously. So Howie was left without a crew at the time. So he contacted me about sailing together for the Durban Worlds in 2000. And obviously that was a pretty easy yes. Mike and I sold the dump truck after the '98 Worlds, and didn't really sail much in '99. So it was nice to get the call up and get back in it.
And you and Howard, what, like 3-4 times on the podium at the Worlds?
We sailed 3 Worlds together, the 2000 Worlds in Durban, and then we sailed in the Malmo Worlds in Sweden and the Santa Cruz Worlds. So I think we sailed in Durban in 2000, and then he went back to sailing with Mike or somebody else for the next couple of years, and then we got back together after I think a year break. I started sailing back with him again, and we had 3 podium finishes in 3 tries. So 3rd in Durban, 3rd in Sweden, and 2nd in Santa Cruz. I wouldn't say we're ever really close to winning any of those events, but certainly we're training and preparing as if we could. Probably our most realistic shot at it would have been in Sweden, kind of a more moderate air event. But we had a really bad first day, two race day. I'm not sure if we ended up dropping both those scores in the end, but it was not a solid day for us,
right,
to begin that event. So we, won some races at that event and finished 3rd. I think Wolfgang and Holger won that World. And Christer Bergstrom might have been 2nd, and we were 3rd.
So there's like 19 Worlds wins in the podium on that year.
Yeah, it was well. Anytime you have a European Worlds, I mean, there's plenty of past champions that roll out and populate the field.
Right. So somewhere in there must have been the switch to the big kites, right?
Yeah. I think Howard and I only sailed with big kites. So that would have been, maybe Durban was the first year with the big kites.
Okay.
And kind of concurrently, the class went high aspect. One of the things a lot of people don't realize is that in '98 in Hyannis, Mike and Howard had the first kind of set of high aspect foils. I take that back. Not the first, because other people had tried it, Brentford Eck and others, but the first sort of successful attempt at using high aspect foils. The rest of the fleet was still using the big, 15-inch on the root cord centerboards and, 10 or 12-inch wide rudders. And they showed up in Hyannis with high aspect foils, which might not have been totally optimized because they, probably should have had a bigger speed advantage, with a year more development. And then won the world the next year in actually more light air conditions. And they had figured out, so maybe actually it was probably the year before in that 99 World where the switch was made. Because Howard has told me and Mike as well that they won that world with their downwind speed, kind of using an opposite approach. They were basically, when it was lighter winds on the runs, they were sitting in, doing the split run, and then when they would get puffed, so the wind was kind of 8 to 11 for a lot of the races, and when it would puff up to 11, they would jump wire and take off downwind and made some big gains downwind, and apparently that was their one of their big advantages at that particular regatta.
Right on. And how much did the same basic people were doing well? Like, how did the sailing change through all these changes, or was it just,
I think the biggest change when the big kites came was the course configuration. You went from that equilateral triangle, and a triangle, at the Worlds, the course, the default course was a triangle, windward leeward triangle, finish upwind. So, you had 4, basically 2-mile reaches. So, big emphasis on the tight reaching skills. So the kites were very small and, a lot of technique around, really just laying the jibe mark. I mean, half the time you'd come around in a World's race, you'd be like, wait, what? Like, we're going up there? Really? It seemed like it was 25 degrees below your upwind sailing angle. So that was obviously the most important part of 505 racing at the time was, whether or not you could tight reach well. And the racing, the legends of that era of sailing, Peter Kolkloff and Christopher Bergstrom, those teams could round the top mark in the 30s or 40s in a big World's race and be 4th or 5th at the leeward mark, just Ginsu through the fleet on the 2 reaches, just get up in the high lane and rip. So the biggest and most obvious change was that they brought it back to more of an Olympic triangle, and people pretty quickly figured out that, like, well, tight reaching is great, but it's a pain in the ass. Like, why don't we just pull the pole back a few inches and still be on the wire, but let's just try to go fast downwind instead of fast upwind with a kite.
Right on. And then we get into the era that you're got the most unique thing. You kind of became a quasi pro 505 sailor for a while, getting hooked up with Hasso Plattner. How did that all come to be?
Well, Morgan Larson called me in 2005, I guess it would be, and was like, hey, I got this client. He wants to start sailing 505. He's an old FD and 470 sailor from Germany, and he's looking for a crew. It'd be a pretty good gig. And he's like, are you interested? And I'm like, I don't know, Morgan, what do you think? Should I be interested? And he's like, yeah, I pretty much think you should be interested. So, it was just kind of a feel it out at first. He's like, well, why don't you come to Bermuda? We're going to be there in a couple months, with 2 boats. We're going to bring a German team over, and we'll just do some sailing in Bermuda. So I flew down to Bermuda, met Hasso, and ended up the German team that they brought over was Wolfgang Hunger and Holger Yes, the current world champions.
A German team.
a German team. Well, Hasso and Wolfie were friends from 470 days. Like they, you know, both from Kiel or Kiel area. So Hasso had known Wolfie a long time, and you know, it wasn't a, you know, so they had some history there. It was easy to get him to come along. But I remember like how, you know, getting picked up in the chase boat at the dock. You know, the boats were already out sailing, and I think Hasso was sailing with Holger at the time, so I jumped in the boat with Wolfgang and basically sailed the first half of the day with Wolfgang, which was obviously a real treat. And then met Hasso and hit it off, and did a lot of days in the boat with Hasso over the years.
Right on. And we're kind of getting pressed on time a little bit, and I don't want to keep your whole afternoon. So there's a bunch of stuff we're going to gloss over, but you know, in the time sort of between that tapering off and now, you've done super yachts. You and I have done a lot of Marstrom sailing together. You know, you've kind of been well off the leash in terms of all the sailing you've been doing, and now you and Zani are getting the band back together. Like, talk us through that decision.
I guess since Hasso kind of tapered off, I guess it would have been the Kiel World was the last time we really raced competitively. So that was 2015, I think, or 2014, or 16. I don't know. They all blend together. And we had done a handful of days, Hasso and I, sailing since then. But I knew he had the boats in California that were basically in a storage container unused. So I always had this thought in the back of my mind. I was like, well, when Hasso really thinks he's done, maybe I'll ask him if he'd sell me the boats. And then Zani, you know, I see him around a bit, and he kind of floated the idea. He's like, hey, we should maybe get back in the 505 together. And I said, well, okay. I got an idea for where we could find a boat. And that's sort of the how it all came about. And, you know, I was, you know, keen to get back and sail with somebody. I hadn't really thought too seriously about it, but you know, was always open to the idea.
And so what are you most looking forward to? You know, we've got Worlds in Bermuda. We've got boats to sail against in Newport and train with. We got, you know, a bit of a fleet now. What, you know, what are you guys looking to get out of this year?
Well, I think, you know, for me, I the thing that I miss the most, aside from just the actual sailing of the boats, but like you mentioned, I do plenty of sailing, so it's not like I'm jonesing for sailing days, but I do enjoy sailing the boat, but I really miss the people in the class. You know, just seeing all the guys from the West Coast and all my friends from around the world. So that to me is a big draw, you know, to get back in and just, you know, reconnect with some of these people that you only see on, you know, the occasional call or, you know, follow them in the news. So super excited to get back together with the people, and also the process is always fun. You know, I've sailed with Mike, so we're not starting from zero, but, you know, just kind of getting back up to speed and just getting into it. You know, I love that grind of, you know, getting good again.
Right.
Or trying to get good again.
Yeah, trying.
This is assuming that I can tack. I'm no longer sure that I can actually get under the boom anymore, but.
Yeah, the boom's not getting any higher.
No, but, you know, maybe we can modify our boat a little bit.
Yeah, you know, the don't be a stranger to the flattener.
Exactly.
So last question before we let you get back to your real life here. What's your best 5-0 sailing memory?
Oh wow, that's a hard one to pin down, but I've always really enjoyed sailing the boat at the upper end of the wind range. You know, whether it's with that in mind, I think probably my two two best memories are, it was a notable day training with Hasso before the Barbados World, where we were out with 5 or 6 other boats just training. We were running a little camp down there, and it was just a magic day. That was such a sweet place to sail 505. Just, you know, basically sailing in rash guards, and we took off downwind up from the island and just sailed for like an hour downwind in like 18 to 22 knots, you know, just windy but manageable, and just absolutely glorious. Just long period ocean swell, and just like was a really, really memorable day. And Hasso, in all the years after that, has always brought up that day as well. Like, wow, it's just a magic day of sailing in a totally magic spot. The big bummer with that day was when we finally took the kites down and headed back upwind. We're like, oh my God, like, because it was also going down current. If you sailed there, you know, we're going downwind, down current. You know, there's probably 3/4 of a knot of current there. So it took, you know, it felt like 3 hours beating to get back to the beach. But just that trip off, you know, right off the beach, kite up, and then just pinning it. It was like just a magic afternoon.
Right on.
And then the other days that I really enjoyed, one in particular, when I first started sailing with Howard, we knew that Durban was going to be a windy world, so we basically only raced in Santa Cruz or Long Beach or San Francisco that whole year. And we would typically do a training weekend in Santa Cruz with, you know, racing on a couple days, but you know, they would call racing at whatever 3 o'clock and send everyone in, and then we would take off upwind. And if you sailed in Santa Cruz, you know, basically the further upwind and offshore you go, the windier it gets. So you can basically dial in as much wind as you want. And so we had this routine where we're like, well, we really have to test ourselves here and sail when it's very uncomfortable. So we would just lump it upwind. And there was one day, you know, if you've ever sailed in real big breeze, like you get to the point where you have to start letting the jib out in the puff or where you capsize, because the main will luff and then eventually explode, and you know, you just keep getting blown over in the big puff. So we were like, all right, well, let's go upwind and we'll just keep going and going and going until we fully rag the jib in the puff, and then we'll turn and go downwind, which of course is offshore, windier still, and try to make the jibe, and then, you know, come back in. That was our training loop post racing and for a day in Santa Cruz. And there was one day where we just went upwind with Mike and Mike, and just absolutely nuking by the time we turned downwind. And we, you know, made the bear away, got the kite up, jumped wire, just torching along. Like, just so much fun. Big ocean swells in Santa Cruz, you know, 8 to 10 foot waves, or at least East Coast 8 to 10 foot waves, and long period, just like one of these magic days. And then we go for the jibe, and we flipped so hard. I mean, it was just like one of these instant splatter capsizes. And Howie and I both ended up on the leeward side, and we're like, you know, looking at each other before we even got on the board. And I was like, what happened? Like, because we never flipped. I mean, we raced together for 3 years, and I think that was the first of our 2 capsizes total in, you know, 3 years of sailing together. And I remember we both kind of like pulled ourselves up over the edge of the rail, and it was just like this, like 30 plus knot puff, like blasting down. And I looked around, and the 3 other boats we were sailing with, it was like the full graveyard. Like Mike Holt and Mike Martin were also upside down right next to us, and everyone was just laughing. Like, nice. All right, it's windy.
That's fantastic.
So those are the most vivid memories. You know, just that on the upper edge in Santa Cruz, and you know, and the long period ocean sailing in Barbados. Just such good times.
Awesome. All right. Well, I'll let you get back to it. So you're the first person I ever sailed a cat with, and now you're the first person I've ever done this with. So, you know, mark everyone down. I can't wait to start sailing. We got a couple of days of skiing left to do here, but before long we're going to be in the dry suits and heading out and starting the grind, and I can't wait. It's going to be so much fun.
Yeah, it should be awesome.
Right on.
Nice to see you, Dave, and I can't wait to get on the water.
Yeah. All right. Thanks a lot, Pete. Talk soon.